Hello, and you're very welcome to Wednesday's Irish Realtor Association celebration of International Persons with Disabilities. We're delighted that you can listen in, and thank you for joining us for those of you who can. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Irish Realtor Association's National Advocacy Manager, Joan Carthy. Joan is a wheelchair user herself. She's married and a proud mother of Christopher and wife of Deirdre. And Joan, we're delighted to have you here today. Well, I'm delighted to have you here today because, as your colleague who works with you on a day-to-day basis, I'm looking forward to having you in a live Facebook talk where we can shoot the breeze.
Thanks a million, John. Delighted to be here. And as I say, this is a little bit unusual for you and me. We're used to shooting the breeze between ourselves. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Well, now what we're going to do is expose the world to the type of conversations that we have every day and
They may
possibly
not be
frighten them.
ready for it.
But they may not. They may not. But let's go for it. So today we're going to talk together about lots of different topics. And if anybody has any questions as we're going through, hopefully we'll get to see them there, and we can address any questions that you may have. So please don't be shy about sending in any questions that you may have. So look, Joan, I think we'll get started on our big long list of questions. And I suppose that we talk through all of these things every day, but one of the things we slag Joan about here in the office is that she's Mrs. UNCRPD. That the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. And I suppose, Joan, how important do you think the convention is, and how can it make a difference to the voice of disabled people?
Yeah, good question, John. Look, it's a really important piece where people really need to understand that they have rights as a person with a disability. And the UNCRPD covers all of the rights. There's about 50 articles in it, but it covers everything from the right to living independently, the right to your own home, the right to transport, political life. And it also covers things like being involved in the law. So
Mm,
that's actually having full access to either being part of a jury, being part of the legal system, or even being arrested and being able to be treated in the right manner. So anything that you can think of that crosses over your life, there's an article there that backs it. So while we don't have to be experts in UNCRPD, it is really good for us to be able to know about it. And when we're pushing for our rights, to be able to say that I have got a right and that
mm.
you as a government or a public body needs to listen to that and needs to work on whatever that issue is.
Yeah, I like the fact that you brought in the arrested piece because if you want equality or equity, you get equity. And we're often joking that to some people we will say just because you have a disability doesn't mean you're a nice person. Disabled people can be criminals too. So hopefully you or I will never get to the point that we're arrested. I think our behavior. Well,
Well,
don't say it.
hopefully not, but maybe that depends on our level of activism if things
Uh,
don't
well,
seriously
well,
change.
if things don't change, Leo, you're the next Taoiseach. I hope you're listening. You might be having to arrest us. Do you think people understand the UNCRPD? Do you think they understand how they can use it to make a difference in their life?
Um, I don't think enough people know.
Mm,
I think that's the
yeah.
problem. Lots of people, I suppose, who are active in this space will have started to understand it absolutely. But people who are living their lives with a disability, just trying to make the best of what they're doing, may not
Mm.
necessarily have an understanding. They may have heard of it, but may not know how to use it, or that they can be pushing for their rights under that piece of legal work.
Okay, and the important piece in all of this is that their voices are heard, and do you think it's an important tool to ensure that our voices and the voices of all other people with disabilities are actually heard? Are there other things as well?
Yeah, look, the UNCRPD is definitely part of that,
Mm,
but people, I suppose, really have to um, instill in themselves that level of confidence to be able to have their voice heard and to make sure that they're working towards that. Within the organisation, John, as you're well aware because you're part of it, we have the self advocacy training for our members, and a lot of that is actually based more around the self confidence, communication styles, all of those bits and pieces that come before somebody actually being able to advocate
mm,
for themselves. And we would look very closely at that, just even with people and their families, their friends, service providers, and then more into the public arena. But it is about starting at the very basics and making sure that you have the confidence and you become competent in
mm.
being able to, I suppose, voice your opinion and making sure that people are hearing you.
Yeah, and that's important. I think that the the term advocacy confuses people. I think that they're not quite sure what it is, or they think that it's just the stuff that you do, going into Leinster House and working with the politicians and getting the occasional pat in the head or kiss in the cheek, as the case may be. But it's far beyond that, really, isn't it? Why and what the importance of advocacy? It's not just that. What are the other elements that are crucial? You
Really
touched on
isn't.
some of them there.
Yeah, and you're right. It's not all about the work that the likes of myself and yourself do within IWA.
I'd like
It's
to
about the
everybody who's listening, sorry for interrupting you, to acknowledge the fact that you just acknowledged publicly that I worked. So now that we've established that comment, we can
an
move on.
absolute slip of the tongue there. So my apologies, but um, but it is about, I suppose, the individual on the ground
Mm,
advocating for their own rights. And like I said, it is actually about sometimes the most important thing to you is having your voice heard within your own family or with your friends.
mm,
And when that starts to happen and people start to hear you voicing your opinion, and looking for change, it builds an individual's confidence without a doubt for them to go further. But that advocacy runs very strong through IWA and through many other organisations like ourselves on the ground where individuals are getting involved in their local community. They're talking to county councils about the problems around parking or access to the local banks or whatever it is that causes that.
mm.
Um, I suppose that's causing barriers for them to be able to live their lives. So people are doing it every day. And I think the word advocacy or activism sometimes kind of scares people off. They see it as
Mm.
a much bigger picture, but it's not. It really is about that individual step forward.
Yeah, and it begins at home. Your first step is being comfortable and confident at home with yourself, and then it kind of goes out. Yeah, and Joan, within IWA, we've got self advocacy training, but we do you want to talk a little bit about the disability action groups?
Yeah, they're I suppose, a new initiative that we're running at the moment, and we're setting up 5 disability action groups around the country. So we've one in each region. So all 5 will be set up kind of by the end of December. And the whole idea of them is, and look, there's these type of groups already running around the country in different areas, but it is about getting the community together.
Mm,
But I'm talking specifically about people with disabilities because it's their voices that we really need to hear. And having it on a local basis, the idea is to get people together for them to decide what their issue is that they want to work collectively on in their
mm,
local communities. But then moving on from that, actually having a voice into like a steering committee,
mm,
so that we're actually getting a much more kind of national understanding of what's going on. And then it just makes the issue much stronger. The voice is much stronger if
mm,
we come together at that level. And then from an IWA point of view and from the push that we would put politically, we have much more voices as a collective.
mm.
So it'll help the individual on the ground, but it will also help kind of the national conversation too.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes the with advocacy, I get frustrated because
Only
you feel
sometimes.
only sometimes. Other times, well, it depends on which strand of advocacy you're working on. Your strand frustrates me, like going out to and talking and awareness and education and self advocacy. That's less frustrating because you can see more tangible results at times. But I get frustrated with the likes of the dealing with the politicians, and I don't do as much as you. How challenging is the world of advocacy? Because it drives me bonkers sometimes.
Yeah, and me too. And I think everybody that's involved in it, because change is very slow. So you
Mm.
really have to take up those kind of the small wins, so that you
Yeah.
don't actually lose faith in the system, or you don't give up. So it's really important to kind of look at the smaller wins as you go along. Um, it can be very frustrating. As I said, it's very slow. But it's like everything else that we do in life. It's about building relationships. It's about making sure that you don't just kind of come up with an issue and speak about it once, but you speak to as many people as possible,
Mm.
and kind of build your army. So that's what it's about. But that can take time. So it's not only the politicians; it might be corporates, it might be local community people. It really depends on what your issue is, but it is about building relationships and building that army and kind of just keeping going and being having a really good understanding of what that particular issue is that you're fighting for.
Mm.
Like, what is the impact on your life as it stands at the moment? And what would the impact be if that issue was changed and sorted? And it's really important to have very, very clear goals around what it is that you want to achieve.
Yeah, recently I was watching episodes of Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, and what blew me away, apart from the comedy, it's so well written. It's so true today as it was back in the, I don't know, you're older than me. You can tell me, was it the 70s?
Not by that much now, John. Um, Come on, let's keep it friendly here.
Let's.
Um, but yeah, look, I suppose yeah, a lot of it is still very true. What's happening, and I think you can very easily fall into that space of when you're meeting with politicians. It's very seldom they'll actually disagree with what you're looking for, especially because most of the time, if not all the time, it's a right. It's about
Yeah,
improving
yeah.
your life and the lives of others. So they're not going to disagree with you. So it's very easy to fall into a trap of, oh, we have people that agree with us.
Mm.
Agreeing with us and actually being ready to move on it and being active on it are two very different spaces. So again, it's really important not to fall into that trap. You have to keep the communication going. You have to keep going back, because in a lot of cases it can be a little bit like that. You know, people yesing you to death, but actually not doing anything about it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And by the way, excuse me, I should have said at the beginning, as is just being displayed on the screen at the moment, that if you do post live social comments, this is a live broadcast and they cannot be deleted from the stream. So you need to be aware of that. But Joan, it's so what makes them tick? I was at a session recently when we spoke a lot about you can be busy doing lots of things, making yourself, feel and be busy. But are they the things that are making the changes? Are they the thing bringing you closer to what our objective is, whatever that objective would be, whether it be access or housing? So, what makes politicians and their civil servants, the decision makers, what makes them listen?
Well, I think in some ways it's actually about you having the answer, you having the
Okay.
solution,
Mm.
having nearly the work done for them
Okay.
is usually a huge help. Um,
Arr.
Pressure, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The getting the public behind you
Mm.
so that it's not just a small group. What we would find is in a lot of issues that we're talking about in relation to disability, the impact is right across the board. You know, what we're looking for change in a lot of things would actually help older people, would help parents with buggies, would help so many other,
Mm.
kind of spaces. So it is about looking at not just being a disability agenda,
Mm.
but actually how broad can you bring that for that particular issue and how many other people and communities can you bring in.
Does it have to be about stats, or how important is the lived experience? So your experience, your story, does that cut any mustard?
Lived experience is hugely important.
Mm.
But I suppose where I have my bugbear is that it's one thing asking a person with a disability to tell their story for impact. It's another thing that we have to rely on it so much nearly kind of pulling at the heartstrings. It's unfair to actually ask people constantly to tell
Mm,
their story, to tell it to the public. Now, their neighbour knows what it is that they want or they need or whatever, or the person down the road or the person in another country, and once that
mm,
goes out publicly, it's there, so I think it is unfair that we have to constantly ask people to do that. And it's our job, I suppose, to mind people as well
mm.
when we're asking them to do that piece. Stats are important as well, but it's interesting. Like we would say, kind of stats are important, but sometimes the stats aren't out there. Sometimes
Yeah,
we actually like even something as what we would think as being simple as the amount of people who use wheelchairs in Ireland. That statistic isn't anywhere.
it's not in the census
It's not
form,
in
is
the
it?
census form. There,
Crazy.
there is a consultation happening in relation to um, what questions people want asked in the next census. But that's another, 5 years away.
Mm,
We still haven't got it on it that we have any idea of the numbers of people who are wheelchair users. And that's only one side of disability. I'm very aware of that. But when
mm,
we're looking at, say, the physical access into a house so that the house is wheelchair livable, it's impossible to actually start talking to the politicians and say, well, we don't know what the percentage is that we need
mm.
because actually there's no statistics out there.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, the lived experience, it's interesting to hear your comments because we both have very, very different stories, but some of the similarities in the lived experience uh, come through strongly. You acquired your disability, I was born with mine. But at the end of the day, we're both wheelchair users, and that story, different slants on a theme, variation on a theme,
Hmm.
I would imagine. Um, but I'll resist the urge to slag us both off any further, and I'll move on to some of the language around disability. And this has been a very relevant and hot topic in Irish Wheelchair Association over the last 6 months. Very important piece of work, and I say that because I was the one who had to do it. So, needless to say,
Makes it
it's
all
it's
the more important.
abs- all the more important. I'm glad you said it publicly again. So, do you ever think we'll come to the place where we'll have a world that we don't have to use the word disability?
I don't know, John, to be honest with you, and I'm not sure I would even want that.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, because we have to remember that disability in itself is a culture,
mm,
like many other cultures, and it comes with its own story and its own legacy. A lot of it negative, but a lot of it very positive as well. And I
I'm going to
suppose
use
it
that
kind of,
line.
pardon?
I'm going to use that line about the legacy and the story. Haven't used that one before, but it's true.
um,
Yep.
but and I think that's the really important piece. A lot of it very positive. We've had a lot of very, I suppose, major activists right around the world. And I know you were talking to Paddy Slattery and spoke about Martin Naughton, and he's only one amongst many Irish activists who made a huge change
Mm,
within the country in relation to living independently for people with disabilities. So there is that piece, but within culture, it's hugely important that to remember that every culture is made up of individuals.
mm,
So not one term is going to suit everybody.
mm,
And I think that's probably something that we're finding that some people are happy or can, kind of identify with being called a disabled person. Some want the people first, so person with a
mm.
disability.
Yeah,
Other people with disabilities don't relate to the word at all.
yep, yeah,
And I suppose again it's about the context as well in what we in how we use it and why we're using the label. So getting rid of the word disability, I'm not sure would be on my agenda, but I would love to be able to see obviously a world that hadn't got the barriers there.
yeah, yeah. And
So
I
put
agree
us
with
on
you.
a playing field. So I think that to me would be where it is. And I think some people probably don't really understand what's behind the ownership of disabled people as a terminology,
Mm,
and that really is about kind of it's the barriers that society has put in our ways as
mm,
opposed to being directed at the individual themselves. So I think a bit of it's about an understanding. But look, I think we'll find out from the piece of work you're doing that there's there's no title or label that fits everybody.
Okay, and I won't preempt the outcomes of that because it's still ongoing. But
Yeah,
so we'll,
absolutely.
we'll just build suspense to what the great declaration will be when the time comes. But it's true when so many people don't identify with the word. But what I'd love to achieve, like you though, is a point where I think and what's realistic to achieve as well is that we come to a point that the word's just a word. It's just something that gives context, nothing more,
Hmm.
and that's where it would be relevant. And I think that's where so many people are don't identify with the word, not because of the actual word, but it's all the connotations that come with it. I suppose there's the lack of expectation of someone who has a disability. People think that they can't achieve more or the
Hmm.
same. Doesn't even have to be a bit more, and we'll come to that. Or just that our life has to be less than somebody who doesn't have a disability. And we need to. What I don't want is for, as the constant joke about people not seeing my wheelchair, they only see me. And I laugh because they're saying, well, I think you might have a disability too because I'm sitting in it, so it's very hard to miss. We
Absolutely. Yeah.
don't yeah,
Yeah.
we don't want it ignored. We don't want it's not a negative thing, it's not a dirty word. We don't have to people don't have to avoid, because avoidance is as much of a problem in the world as the discrimination. People not talking about it are not acknowledging it, but it's not all we are. I
Absolutely. And I think
yeah.
the fear and the worry is um, that people are afraid of the language
Mm,
because
terrified.
they're so afraid to offend. But I would always say, well, if you're talking to and approaching somebody with a disability, you're actually approaching a person.
Mm,
So the language actually doesn't matter because you're not going to go up to a person and say, "Hi, person with a disability." Like it's,
but
and
well,
I'm
if you
always kind of
do, oh
fascinated.
God.
I know I'm always fascinated with that conversation piece as well because
Yeah,
you're meeting a person first. You're not going to be talking about what's wrong with them or right with them or
yeah, and sometimes
whatever
we
way you
will
can
get
see
that.
this. It
We
is.
will
Yeah,
get
we do.
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm yeah. I remember being down in West Cork, and I was sitting at at a table with Mary and Harry, who's my 6-year-old, and we were just chatting there. And this man comes up and says hello to Mary and Harry, and he looks at me and goes, "Oh, what's wrong with you?" And I was taken aback, and normally I would answer, "Well, nothing. What's wrong with you for asking that question?" But
Yeah,
I didn't. I was gobsmacked because I hadn't heard it, and it's a reminder to me that it does happen. It's not an urban myth. People do pat us on the
yeah.
head, but I do think people don't willingly want to cause offense. So that's why the conversations are more important than ever, and that openness. But also, I do think, and tell me what you think about this. But I think in the world that we work in, it's the disability sector. I don't like that term, but that sometimes people are very eager to take offense as well, and that worries me because if you're so precious about language, you end up putting the fear of God into the people. To your point, and you end up
Mm.
not talking about it at all. Am, am I
Yeah,
am I
yeah, and
wrong in
I
saying
think
that?
you're right. No, I think you're right. I think that can happen. But I think that's more about where that individual is coming from, maybe themselves. And
Yeah,
I just think it is about that we can't judge too much people's um, thoughts, ideas um, in relation to language,
yeah,
because there's usually a backstory somewhere along the way.
yeah.
And who is it for me to say that my preference is the right preference?
Well, that's interesting. Where are you on the person with the disability versus the disabled person? So the one we talked about, identity first versus person first terminology. Where are you on the fence on that one? Are you on the fence?
I'll be very honest. I don't really care.
Then
I
yeah,
really don't have a strong opinion either way. I think, and do you know what, when I was shortly after my injury, I suppose, and for the first good few years, I think I probably would have went absolutely person first. You have to see me as a person. But it wasn't until kind of as time went by, I kind of thought more about it. Um, and actually, I am a disabled person. Whether you call me a person first or disabled, what way you kind of turn the words around doesn't really change. That
Hmm.
disability is part of who I am. So I really don't mind either
Yeah.
way. And I think that's the important bit of kind of making sure that we maybe interchange language if we're
Mm.
looking at documents and things like that, because we're not going to keep everybody happy.
Yeah, and it's that choice. For me, it's I'm with you. I don't mind either term. I use them interchangeably, but the choice, I would probably default to person first. That's the
Mm,
world I grew up in. That's my stance, but I use them interchangeably. So again, that it's for me the important piece here is that nobody tells me I'm wrong because that's my choice.
yeah.
I do get angry when people tell me, well, you can't say it has to be disabled person. I went, no, I disagree with you, and it's my right. I'm sure I'll find an article in UNCRPD somewhere about that my right to disagree. So I'm not on the fence on this. But it's an interesting. I feel sorry for people who are unsure because it can be quite an unsettling topic. So I would go out to people and say either are is perfectly acceptable. And just in the conversation we were chatting there about just the word disability. How do you feel about the definition that I call it inspiration porn? I've been talking about it in each of the Facebook lives this week as a theme about the expectation that if as someone who has a disability that if you're not climbing three mountains with three fridges on your back in 2 days, that
Hmm.
you're not achieving. So it's about that expectation of success, that definition of success for someone who has a disability, and that if you're not achieving that level, that you're not successful. How do you feel
Mm.
about that? Because it bugs me.
Yeah, and look, well, it bugs me too.
Well, I know it
And
bugs
I
you, but I
think,
had to ask the question, so you'd have
yeah,
to
yeah,
answer.
and I, and I, for me, it's about that piece of who you are as an individual and how we all achieve different things
Mm,
in life. So again, it's for some people it is about climbing the mountain. I would have again just kind of going back to a bit more of a personal story. In the earlier days, I think maybe a lot of things I did to prove that I was still Joan Carthy,
yeah. Okay. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that the whole disability thing wasn't going to define me. And I think
Mm,
that's probably why I did things. So doing some of the stuff that were a little bit more, I suppose, the adventurous side of me
mm,
was still coming out, and I was making sure that that was coming out, so people would still see me as Joan Carthy and not, oh, poor Joan who had the accident, and
mm.
that was kind of becoming my legacy. And that's probably why I, did parachute jumps and kind of things like that. So no, don't get me wrong, it wasn't all for that. I enjoyed it. I loved it. It was something I wanted to do anyway. But
Yeah.
without a doubt, it was a part of kind of proving things to myself and doing things big so it would show people that I was still me. Um, as I get older, maybe, and you're going to slag me over this, I did get a little bit wiser. Um, maybe not much, but a little bit wiser. But actually, anything I do now is just for me
Yeah. Yeah.
and for my
Yeah. Yeah.
family as
Yeah.
opposed to my identity. So,
You don't feel the need
um,
to prove to yourself that you. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And look, if somebody wants to, as you say, climb a mountain with three fridges on their back, go for it. Congratulations. But we have to celebrate the day to day stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're both parents. I think that's, for me, and I know you said it before, it's the biggest achievement.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see if it's an achievement if he survives. That's
There is a debate. There is a
we'll go
debate.
with that one. But there's those type of things. There's work achievements. There's family achievements, and I think we just need to kind of let ourselves off the hook a little bit and kind of, you know, and I suppose really with social media, I mean, there was one thing um, with mainstream media,
Mm,
you'd have people who are being interviewed and people. only want to listen to people who have really interesting stories, who have done something different. And that's going to happen now more so because of social
Mm,
media. So there might be that expectation that as a person with a disability to be noticed, you
mm.
have to go that little bit further.
Yeah, and that's the piece that annoys me. And by the way, just for clarity, people out there who are listening, if we would refer to Joan as poor Joan for a myriad of reasons and
Nothing got to do with my
nothing
disability.
to do with her disability. I can tell you now. It's like she drinks tea that's like literally had the tea bag just dipped into the cup. Like that's just it's like flavored water. Like we poor Joan never learned from her second parachute jump. She did one once and then she did it again. And Joan, what happened on your second parachute jump?
I broke both my legs on the
Yeah,
land.
but she never learns. Poor Joan. Poor Joan. But however, so for a myriad of other reasons, and it's not just about that. Joan, if you were Taoiseach for the day, what would you change? I know you love these questions.
Yeah, I know. Um, and that's probably because there's so many things that need to be changed. And I know, I think one of your
Yes, it
other
is.
guests said, get rid of everybody in government would be the starting point. Um, but I think in relation to disability, the big thing that needs to be really understood is the extra cost of living with a disability.
Mm,
And in the last budget, people with disabilities got a lump sum payment of €500. Um, and I think people very quickly went, God, that's great. We're after getting something. Of course, it helped. Um, but if it's not seen as being a long term issue, we're going to continually get this kind of handout of €500 here and there or whatever. Um, but it's really important to for the government to actually work in that space and
mm,
really recognise the long term cost and impact of living with a disability. Everything that you do costs more,
yeah.
even
Yeah.
outside your equipment that you
Mm,
might need. But trying to travel, whether it's if you're living in a remote area, it's your reliance on taxis. Even if you want to go on holidays, for those who can afford to go on holidays, you're paying extra to make sure that you get to either a good hotel that's accessible, or you have to go to a certain airline because you're treated better. There's all sorts of things. And
mm.
then with our general energy bills, people with disabilities generally need more heat, more clothing, so for me, that would be the big thing, is to recognize, not only recognize it, but actually implement a payment.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because while we would welcome at the time of the budget that the Minister for Disabilities, Anne Rabbitte, came up with an additional source of funding, it was very difficult for us to celebrate that because we didn't know what it was for and we didn't know what they were going to be doing with that money. And for me, that's part of the problem. Maybe it feeds into your point about yeah, great, but we'll celebrate it when we know what you're going to do with it because if it's spent on the wrong things, which I think feeds into your point, it's very hard to celebrate that.
Yeah, without a doubt. And again, it's, I suppose, the other thing, it's about making the budget accessible to people.
Mm.
And when I say accessible, I mean that people understand what monies are being given where.
Yeah,
And that further breakdown is sometimes the department themselves don't know the breakdown until they have done up their action plan for the year. Um, but as you said, it's very hard for organisations like ourselves to be active in that space kind of the week after or 2 weeks after the budget, to actually know, are we
yeah,
celebrating? Are we giving out yet again?
yeah, yeah.
Or what sort of funding is coming down and how it's going to impact us.
I think people will assume we're going to give out anyway, but that's our job. Yeah, that's our job. No, but in fairness, it's our job to advocate, and but it's also our job to celebrate if it's justified and to recognize when the achievements are made or when something has been changed. It's just that it's so slow when they do come.
It is, absolutely, and I think from the disability community, we do celebrate it when it comes, but we had to move to the next issue very quickly, and
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
maybe where the loss is.
We had a comment there from Natasha who was talking about just a disability, I suppose, awareness and in schools. In terms of attitudes, how do you think how important do you think it is to get them at an age young enough. And I suppose I'm plugging our Daisy project here. So when I say them, get to the children at a age young enough when we can influence how they're thinking.
Oh, look, it's hugely important. It's so difficult to influence people when they're adults and they're working and they're involved in all sorts of everything.
They're your
Um,
age.
but if yeah, my age, heading into the OAP. But anyway, um, the so to be able to get at children as young as possible, but not just as a once off, that it kind of, travels with them through school. And as you said, the Daisy program is done through arts and drama, and all the resources are given to the teachers for them to be able to teach this module within class. So it's not like they have to go off looking for stuff. The
Mm.
Daisy project gives every single idea that you can think of in relation to how you talk about disability to young children in the format of art and drama.
Yeah, and
So if there's any schools out there listening in, we'll definitely be in touch with you, but please make the connection. It's a great module for the young children, and we hope to develop that kind of up through the schools and into secondary schools.
yeah, I think it's a really good resource, and it reiterate to people, if whoever's listening and you know a school that might be interested, it's free. At the moment. Like it's there to be used, and what we're trying to do is raise that. And we've got Adele, who's joined our team, who's out there working with the schools, and we've got Martin Kelly, who manages the project. But we don't allow Martin onto the Facebook lives like this, John, do we? Because he's just got too many opinions. He's too controversial, and
Absolutely.
he doesn't meet the standard of looks required to be on a Facebook.
But besides all of that, it is important though that the funding for that actually came from the toy show appeal, um,
Yes,
or
yeah,
to
the Late Late
originally
Toy
set it
Show.
up. So the Late Late Toy Show appeal is where we got the grant for that, and it's been a significant change in the way we kind of think and work around disability awareness.
And it's a refreshing endorsement for us to be recognised by the Late Late Toy Show Fund, as well. And look, you know me, I'm a big Christmas fan, so the Late Late Toy Show is probably one of the highlights of my year. At my age, it just makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside the fact that we're being supported through that channel. Yes, folks, this is what Joan has to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
I was
So,
going to
Joan,
say, I mean, how many times are we going to talk about age rather than disability? But anyway,
Well, there you go. Joan, is just diversity and inclusion here to stay? 2008 was the topic when all buzz, and then the financial crunch hit, and then what was deemed to be a must-have was suddenly demoted to be a nice to have. So the diversity and inclusion agenda fell off the radar, but it's back now with a vengeance,
mm,
and that's probably due to um, Gen Z and how the new generation look at people, and the corporate world tapping into and recognizing that. Do you think it's here to stay? Can we is it going to be something that people really want to embrace now?
it's certainly looking that way. And I suppose there's no way of telling, if funding is cut left, right, and centre in corporates and that, whether it will be the space that's dropped. But I think it's important to, I suppose, recognise that we need to do so much more in relation to disability. It's kind of the poor relation.
Mm,
I would think of diversity and inclusion because people still fear it. They still fear that, it's going to cost a lot of money
mm,
to include people with disabilities and to become that kind of employer of choice. Um, Whereas if you're talking about gender or race, while they may have their own issues, you don't have to do anything or adapt anything. It's more about kind of your culture
yes,
within
yeah,
within a corporate. Whereas with disability, there needs to be a lot more awareness for employers to actually understand that yes, in some cases you may have to spend a bit of money, in other cases you may not. But
mm.
actually, what you receive, what you gain from hiring somebody with a disability, the the payment is tenfold.
Yeah, and I hope that, for me, I hope that it is that cultural shift to inclusion, that you realize the benefits that you can gain from having someone with an alternative experience that you may not have typically had before, someone who has a different outlook, And say for someone who has autism, someone who's autistic, they can view the world in a very different way, which is a real strength in a
Hmm.
discussion. And sometimes we have to bring other people into discussions, Joan, um, because we sometimes think the same way. Now there are times we don't,
There are
and
certainly times we don't. Let's just let let's
could
just
you
get
be
that straight.
could you be less like adamant about that? I'm not so sure I'm comfortable with that. But we do need to bring on other elements to the talk, because that's the important piece wherever that talk is taking place. What advice would you give to a young person? We're at 40 minutes now, so we'll be coming to the end of our chat. Um, what advice would you give to a young person?
The only advice I could give to a young person is be courageous,
Mm,
speak up, and be heard. Um, other than that, it's really about living your life
mm,
in in an exciting and thoughtful way. Um,
yeah,
but uh, just having courage and being
yeah.
able to speak up, that's what's going to change things.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Um, I would say to them is that there's always a way. You just need to find your own how. So don't be shy. And I agree
Hmm.
with you. Live your life. Live it. Live your life. You have the right and the choice and the opportunity to live it the way you want to be, aligned with our vision. Well, I hope you like the way I got that in there. So it's important that you do, and as you say, be courageous. Don't shy away of wanting that. Don't be out there, want it, want to achieve. Who inspires you? And please, Joan, don't embarrass me now.
We're going to cut right past that last question, I think.
What inspires you? I'll
What
say.
inspires me? Young people inspire me. I just feel the generation coming up. Um, it's an incredible generation. They already have strong voices. We're seeing it through um, our membership. The young people coming through, wanting to be able to achieve their own goals, whatever that is. So I'm really inspired about that, and I'm also really inspired about just young people around us
Mm,
in general. And when I say young people, like that's everything from, our own kids, right up to people who I've met kind of through interviewing or through our internship.
mm,
They're a different breed of people. They are
yeah.
so confident in a lot of ways. So
And they are.
yeah,
No, you're brilliant. I noticed the way you diplomatically chose to ignore me pointing to myself. Uh, but I agree with you. They're brilliant. They really are. They are. And they need to take that brilliance and learn from the experience of others and put them together, and they'll be a force to be reckoned with. And I think that that's a great way to end our conversation today. So, Joan, I'll probably be talking to you later on about something or other. But
I'm
thank you
sure.
very much for joining us today and for having the chat. I hope if anybody's watching it now or is looking back on this later on, that there might be something that they can take away from the conversation. So it's nice to celebrate you and do what you do, Joan. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks a million, John. A
Okay,
pleasure as always.
bye bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.